They know I'm the topic. Yeah, 25 double O. They heard I'm the topic. I keep them talking, my ears are open. I can hear what they saying. I'm feeling like Martin. I keep it stepping. I'm kicking knowledge like I'm putting out pans. Just X around it. You can tell how I'm rocking. You'll get the message. I ain't sending out spam. The streets is talking and they know that I'm popping. I'm feeling like I got the word in my hand. They heard I'm the topic. I keep them talking, my ears are open. I can hear what they saying. I'm feeling like Martin. I keep it stepping. I'm kicking knowledge like I'm putting out pans. Just X around it. You can tell how I'm rocking. You'll get the message. I ain't sending out spam. The streets is talking and they know that I'm popping. I'm feeling like I got the word in my hand. I'm here with
Welcome to our first episode of Truth in Heart with Doc. This is a time, everybody, where we're going to try and be clear, real, and honest with ourselves and about different things that we see happening in the world around us, in our lives, in our relationships. We're going to talk about these things and hopefully gain some clarity, additional clarity as it relates to what we need to do differently, how we do those things differently, to hopefully move us forward in a positive way. So let me just back up. My name is Doc. I am a licensed clinical and forensic psychologist, which means that, I'm a mental health professional. I've worked for over 20 years throughout the country working with individuals, families, children, and adults in various mental health settings. I've worked in community mental health centers. I've worked in psychiatric hospitals. I've worked in jails and prisons. I've done a little bit of everything since my early 20s. But there are several things that are consistent with all of this experience. One, primarily, I've always worked with folks who would now be considered at risk. That's the term we use now, at risk. So these are our primarily poor and brown folks in our inner cities and urban neighborhoods, and a lot of poor people across races. So if you're poor and you happen to live in poverty or what we consider those at-risk urban communities, that's primarily who I've worked with. And related to that, I have also worked with a lot of folks who have significant trauma histories. Traumas in their individual homes, traumas in their families, in their communities, be it sexual, physical, emotional abuse, domestic violence, a lot of domestic and intimate partner violence in those kinds of relationships. A lot of folks and communities where there's a lot of crime, this mass incarceration epidemic, if we want to call it that, this epidemic that has run rampant throughout our communities, in our jails and prisons, where a lot of primarily Black folk, Black men in particular, the rates are staggering for folks who are Black and poor and come from a lot of these communities that I've just described and backgrounds. So that's a little bit about me, my specialty. And I have a passion for us. I have a passion for folk who sometimes feel like they don't have a voice and sometimes feel like it would help if there were others to somehow not just speak for them, but to teach them how to speak for themselves. So that's me. I own several businesses and I love what I do. I feel called and passionate about what I do. So we're going to be meeting here once a week and we're going to discuss things related to pop culture, current events, news, politics, mental health, relationships, any and everything. We're going to talk about it. Nothing is off limits. You hear me? Not a thing. Nothing. I think sometimes some folks may think they're ready to talk about these things. But you got to be ready to just kind of lay it all flat and talk about it. Because I think partly that's one of the main reasons why I think so many folks are still struggling, because they don't know how to talk about things. So they hold it in. That's not necessarily the best thing. Sometimes you do what you know. But life is about, if doing what you know doesn't seem to be helpful for you, and helpful meaning moving you forward in a positive way, progressive way, then we maybe got to figure out a different plan B. So again, nothing is off limits. Everything is up for discussion, open for discussion, even here at Truth and Heart with Doc. So let's dive right in. Doc's got something to say. Let's talk about this latest episode of Real Housewives of Atlanta. And I want to talk about it from the context of relationships. So, if you guys catched it last night, here we have the interaction between Kenya and her husband Mark. And Mark is throwing this charity event, and he wants all the men in the circle to try and participate. And so Kenya initially had some concerns about potentially inviting Nene, who is Greg's wife. And so Kenya, in one of her interviews, talked about that. And so a couple of the other ladies mentioned, Portia even said, Dennis is ride or die. If I don't like him, he don't like him. He don't need to know why. He just know he don't like him. And so I really like how toward the end of the episode, Greg came in. He was cordial, but he just really got right to it with Mark, man to man. Pretty much, Greg's like, listen, my wife didn't get an invitation. So if she doesn't, I can't go anywhere that my wife doesn't go. And I really like that in terms of how Greg just spoke to that. So let's talk about that. What does that look like in relationships if someone has an issue, or you have an issue with someone, but your partner doesn't? Are you one? Does that oneness mean or suggest or imply that whatever I don't like or whatever I have an issue with, my partner needs to have an issue with? Sight unseen, no discussion, no questions asked. I don't know. What do you guys think about that? Like, I know that a lot of times when couples part, when they separate, be it the ending of a relationship or the ending of a marriage, sometimes the friends may somehow feel a little stuck or, torn, because it's like, I'm still friends with this person, but, I don't want to, come across as disloyal or, suggesting that my friendship with one isn't genuine. So I know that on the Housewives, we've seen this kind of dynamic before between Phaedra and Candy. Y'all remember that when Phaedra and Apollo were going through what they went through. And I think Phaedra felt some kind of way. And I think this is just my opinion. Y'all chime in the discussions below and tell me what y'all think. I think Phaedra somehow felt some kind of way about Candy still being friendly and cordial with Apollo, because Todd and Apollo are still friends. And I think Candy still likes Apollo as a friend. My opinion, I think personally that may have had something to do with that whole fallout where, Phaedra suggested that Candy might be some kind of sexual predator and wanted to do something, not on a level with Portia, but What do you guys think about that? Um, if your partner or if your person got an invitation even to an event from a person that you weren't necessarily getting along with, what do you think about that? Would you have an issue with that? Should the couple as a whole get one invitation from someone, even if you and that person don't get along, or have whatever issue you have at that moment, but your partner gets along with that person? These are interesting aspects of relationships I think we should talk about. And more importantly, I think this may go into that whole notion of loyalty, right? We all talk about loyalty and wanting somebody to have our back. What does loyalty look like, even maybe in this kind of situation or circumstance? I don't know. Y'all tell me what y'all think. But let's remain tuned in, because it looks like next week's episode is going to be even more interesting as we see more of the dynamic potentially between Kenya and Mark. I don't know. Was that kind of dynamic where Mark, just really kind of shut Kenya down? Was that part of maybe the reason or part of what they're going through overall with all of their couples issues? I don't know. Part of me is like, if I have an issue with someone, or if my person has an issue with someone, what might that suggest if I engaged with someone that my person has an issue with? Yeah, let's think about that. Chime in below. I personally think, I think you just got to be careful about that in relationships, because that whole concept of loyalty and having my back or not having my back, that could potentially come out in that kind of situation. All right, chime in below. Let me know what you think. And now let's move on to our next segment, mental health matters. We're just going to wait a little bit for this week. We're not going to dive into the deep, but I just kind of want to make some suggestions or share some of my thoughts about this whole concept of mental health. Everybody now is talking about it everywhere, all over the place, which on one hand, I'm pleased, because there's so much stigma or so much taboo, especially in some of our communities, around what that means to have a mental health illness, what that means to be diagnosed with such an illness, even more so what that means to seek out professional help for that illness or that whatever it is you're dealing with. But on the other hand, part of me kind of feels like this whole concept of mental health maybe just might become a little cliche, because I just want to make sure we don't lose sight of the main thing. And the main thing is the main thing when it comes to mental health. And the main thing is this: anything that you find yourself dealing with or struggling with that inhibits, stifles, distracts, prevents you from moving forward in a positive way, that gets in the way of you being the best version of you that you want to be, you being safe, you feeling happy, you feeling balanced, you feeling content. Whether or not that thing may be anger outbursts, whether or not that thing may be sometimes you might hear voices, that thing may be sometimes you might pop some of them pills a little too much because you feel like, or a little too often because you feel like you can't cope without them. That thing may be sometimes you feel like you shut down and you disconnect from your children and may struggle to be the best parent or caregiver that you can be to them. It could be any of those things, all of the above, or none of the above. If you find yourself dealing with things like that sometimes or somehow make you feel like you have a hard time coping, that's something that you need to deal with. That's something that you need to get addressed. See, this concept of mental health, it's not just this big thing that's out there, right? Mental health is about our balance. It's about our wellness. Seriously, folks, I'm not trying to snowball you, and I'm not trying to, speak all this, other stuff. I'm just trying to give it to you real flat, real bottom line. Mental health is about us, again, feeling like whatever stands in the way or prevents or keeps us from being the best version of ourselves, mentally, psychologically, emotionally, whatever that is, that's what you need help with. That's something that needs to be addressed. I think that there are so many of us walking around with all of this stuff on the inside, all of this hurt, all of this grief, all of this stuff we've seen, we've experienced growing up in our homes, in our communities, in our relationships, that we just stuff on the inside until we can't stuff it no more. And I just want you to know, eventually, you're going to get full and that stuff is going to start to spill out. Meaning that, it's going to start to come out in one capacity or another. And so let's take our time with this concept of mental health. Let's take our time even more when we talk about ways and things that we can use to help ourselves. All right, so we're going to talk about this topic again several times in our Mental Health Matters segment, among other things. All right, folks, so thank you for joining me for my first episode of Truth and Heart with Doc. Hope to see you again next week. Don't forget, hit the subscribe button below, and be sure if something piqued your interest or if you got something to say, this is a two-way conversation. Feel free. Sound off below in the discussions. There is nothing that is off limits in terms of what we're going to talk about or your response or feedback to what you talk or your feedback to what I've said. All right, folks. Hope to see you next week. Thank you for tuning in with me for our first episode of Truth and Heart with Doc. Let your mind be open to recognize the truth and your heart be able to receive. Take care. Bye-bye.
I keep it stepping, I'm kicking knowledge like I'm putting out pans. Just X around it, you can tell how I'm rocking. You'll get the message, I ain't sending out spam. The streets is talking and they know that I'm popping. I'm feeling like I got the word in my hand. They heard I'm the topic, I keep them talking, my ears are open. I can hear what they saying, I'm feeling like Martin.